Well, I woke up early this morning, very early, probably before 4 for sure. And so it's early, and I wanted to go ahead and do the third part of my videos on Thérèse of Lisieux. And, she is the saint of trust and abandonment, which probably sound like cliches, but she embodies this trust and abandonment even in the midst of her own Holocaust, basically burning up with this tuberculosis at age 24. And having been perfected in such a manner, as the letter to the Hebrews would say about Jesus in chapter 5, she has become not the source of eternal salvation like Jesus, but a person who has been able to instill great trust and confidence in a lot of people. And therefore, along with Charles de Foucault, as I said, who is the universal brother, having gone to the Sahara to live among the Muslims, evangelizing, quote unquote, without speaking, by example, which is what we need today. Thérèse, on the other hand, being the other beacon of the 20th century, as Yves Congar said, is the saint of the modern anxieties and neuroses and nervousness and lack of trust. Today, more than ever, people don't trust the news. Those who doubt COVID, take a look at India, see if they're joking around over there with the spread of COVID. So again, this book by Jean-François Cisse, The True Infancy of Thérèse of Lisieux, Neurosis and Sanctity. And today I scanned some things that I wanted to scan. When I visited Lisieux in 1999, you can see it here, the 10th of June, 1999, one of the things that most struck me were these, I call them plaques, marble things put on the walls of the crypt underneath, where she's buried. Her tomb is actually this one with her, Thérèse of Lisieux, Reverend Agnes of Jesus, Pauline, her beloved sister who died in 1951, Marie du Sacré-Cœur, which is her sister, 1940, she died, and the one my father met, Geneviève de la Sainte Face, Céline, she died in 1959. I was already born when she died. So that, but if you see what this one says here, this is from 1920 and 1921. She's not even beatified yet. Dordogne, that's got to be in France. Then Panchgani, India, in loving and grateful acknowledgement of favors received by the Daughters of the Cross, St. Joseph's Convent. Then from Chile, always impressed me. We give thanks to our beloved protector, Sister Thérèse of the Child Jesus, and then a name, I suppose, of a family, Valdez. Another one, I don't know from where, LW, March 1920, profound gratitude to Sister Thérèse of the Child Jesus for cures, for help of all sorts in desperate cases, for the preservation of a soldier, a above all for spiritual graces and deliverance from a very great fear of death. This is the one that struck me. And I have others. Here's a whole bunch of them. The dates 1919, 1920, 1920, 1920, all before she was even beatified. There's actually a book that I read a few years ago, came out a few years ago, We the Troops, Stronger Than Steel, Letters from Those in the Trenches to Thérèse of Lisieux. This is World War I. So this book collects a selection of great letters sent by all kinds of persons giving thanks for her great trust. Her sister Pauline did promote her cause. I was reading the Acts of Beatification, and I saw that they kept referencing to the edition that Pauline, Sister Agnes, was sending out everywhere. It's a big, thick book, 1914 edition. So that's 9 years before she was even beatified. And God gave me the grace to be able to purchase a 1913 edition of the book, Thérèse of the Child Jesus, who died in the odor of sanctity in the Carmel of Lisieux, the 30th of September, 1897, at the age of 24 years. If someone is little and wants to come to me, Proverbs 9, then the contents would be the story of a soul, as redacted a little bit, edited a little bit by Pauline, who kind of wanted to smooth some things out. There's the critical edition, or the authentic manuscripts, came out in 1956, and that's what's available now, the 3 manuscripts, A, B, and C. So this is the story of a soul written by herself, letters and poems, and then a shower of roses, which are testimonies. When I die, I shall rain down a shower of roses. This is the imprimatur page, it's 1913. So that this is what they were sending out before she was beatified. I was privileged to attend her declaration as Doctor of the Church in 1997, the 100th anniversary of her death at St. Peter's. And this is the book they give you there. Famously, Thérèse was looking for her vocation in the church. If you know anything about Thérèse, this is probably one of the memorable passages. And she wants to be a martyr, and she wants to be an apostle, she wants to be a doctor and a teacher and a missionary, and all kinds of huge desires that she had. She's got almost, she considered being sent to Saigon in Vietnam, but her health would not, make that possible. And when I went to this proclamation of Thérèse of the Child Jesus as a doctor of the church, having been a simple nun, the very end, somebody that I take to be a Carmelite cloistered nun, there for the occasion, to read in French this passage of her autobiography. I was following it along, also on the book, in the booklet they give you, and my thought was, all her desires came true. She's the patron of missions. She's a doctor of the church. I forget if I showed you this, but this is very important. I told you, I don't know, I said it in the hour that I lost, so I lost an hour, when my video froze. But I was invited to the French college, a French seminary in Rome in 1996 or 7, by a French priest friend of mine at the Gregorian. And after lunch, they took me up to the roof. Here you see the roof. And they had a statue there, which I am sure, I think, I have a feeling that it's from before even her beatification, but certainly long before she was declared a doctor of the church. And what struck me as very significant was that the inscription in the bottom was Theresia docet, Therese teaches. So what an interesting inscription to put for this young saint way before probably anybody seriously considered that she would become a doctor. What does she teaches? What does she teach? Well, what she teaches is, unless you become like little children, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of the heavens. So Teresa is the saint that teaches us to trust in God as a loving Father who didn't spare his Son. But in the midst of the 20th and now the 21st century's calamities, World War I and the soldiers' testimony, World War II and the Holocaust of the Jews by the Nazis and other peoples, the extermination camps in Russia, so many other calamities, the whole upheaval of the world, the Cold War, yearnings for freedom, liberation with many mistakes and crimes of all kinds in Yugoslavia, everywhere, all the suffering in this lost world. And now COVID, a horrible, completely changing pandemic, has changed social relations, has made all kinds of castles crumble, has made people be enclosed and thinking about their life and having to deal with it in all the ways that people are trying to cope. Miraculously, I think, with, as the book of, I think, Ben Sira, Ecclesiasticus, praises doctors and scientists. Now we have this vaccine that hopefully will enable us to go back to normality. I assume the people that listen to me are not the ones that refuse to have the vaccine, and I'm shocked by people that I know to be intelligent, especially in Italy, that have bought into this falsehood promoted by manipulating politicians that there really is no COVID or it's a hoax or whatever other criminal nonsense is being spread. This is the typical image of Therese, nothing special about it, but it happens to be a holy card given to me in Mexico, probably in the year 1973 or 4. My mother died in 1974. And so my little brother Carlos was left an orphan at the age of 10 from his mother. And shortly after turning 12, he was orphaned from our father. And then at the age of 24, my brother, in 1988, was gunned down in the streets of Miami during the shootouts of the 80s, late 80s. And very pathetically, pathos being, this deep sentiment, he wrote on the back of this holy card, which is a holy card from, quoting Paul VI in this, message for the world missions. The hour of the missions has not passed yet for the church, and in many peoples, it actually is just beginning. And my little brother, in his child's handwriting, so he was 9 years old or 10 years old, actually 10 because his mother has just died. Dad, Louis, Luisa, Terry, and Carlos hyphen me. So there's a lot of suffering, lots of suffering. And, Thérèse represents, and I found it this morning instead of having to go to the internet and having copyright issues. So this is actually the day before, the 9th of June, 1999. This is the famous statue where it says Omen Novum, a new sign. Thérèse is the new sign of the modern era, torn by distrust and doubt and desperation and criminal acts. Look at all the shootings, all these desperate people buying guns and going into movie theaters and going to Las Vegas and planning a shootout of a concert. That's the carnage. Hasn't stopped. And then the police with their brutality, and then the people that don't have their head together enough to act properly when approached by the police. That's the other side of the story that is also taboo to speak about. You can't, say that the police have to grow angel wings and all of a sudden with a magic wand somehow keep law and order. They have to change completely the police. The police to me are incredibly, shoot first, ask questions if they do later. That's horrible. But it sometimes it takes two to tango, and you really have to. Everybody has to examine themselves rather than blame somebody else, which I think is one of the worst things you can have as a philosophy. It's always somebody else's fault. I think I forgot if I said it yesterday or the day before, but I was given a bookmark by an Australian friend, Ken. It is by trust and trust alone that we must attain to love, or we must be led to love. And like last night, a little bit even earlier, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up years ago and said to myself, I couldn't sleep. I want to find the French version of this quote of Thérèse. And I got up and went to my bookshelf, and I had 3 little books that I no longer have. I've given away so many good books even. I've kept all Thérèse's works in French, and many other books, but some of them I gave away. Good books. And sure enough, I picked up this little volume, opened it up at random, didn't find it, turned the page and found it without any idea. And I copied it and put it in my closet in this frame. I had it in the seminary before, etc. C'est la confiance et rien que la confiance qui doit nous conduire à l'amour. It is trust and only trust, nothing but trust, that must lead us to love, capital letter, to God. And so I wanted to finish with what I spoke about, that I probably had already, as really the essence of Thérèse, by her own words. I told you about this great book by Jean-François Cisse, The True Infancy of Thérèse of Lisieux, Neurosis and Sanctity. And on page 224 of this book, he quotes this wonderful thing. And we just spoke about these soldiers writing their letters, right? Writing in 1894, so this is several, she wasn't even sick yet, a canticle in order to obtain the canonization of Venerable Joan of Arc. That was her model. Very French and a fighter. Read Mark Twain's, who wasn't a great believer, book on Joan of Arc, who really touched him. She signed a French soldier, defender of the church, admirer of Joan of Arc. It is actually a citation by Abbé Combe, Introduction to the Spirituality of Saint Thérèse de l'Enfant Jésus, which I've read. And she confided to her sister Agnes that there were to be found, the real feelings of her soul. But it behooves us to look more closely. The Joan of Arc that Thérèse represents in her canticle is in her drama. She's composed, I think, 2 dramas on Joan of Arc. I've read all her dramas. This is the famous picture of Thérèse dressed as Joan of Arc. She's in chains, almost like a ball and chain thing. This is Thérèse dressed up, playing the part of Joan of Arc in her own drama. Jean-François C. says it's a Joan of Arc in prison. Thérèse is, like Joan, imprisoned humanly and spiritually by the pulsions of death. I guess a death throbbing at the door or something. The conventions, the rigid, semi-Jansenist rigidity of the spirituality of the time that she had to fight against. She would fall asleep in choir and say God loves sleeping children too, even though she was very faithful to the rule and dragged herself to the end, to choir, etc. The Jansenism, all the constraints, we have a lot of narrow-minded people in the church today that don't like the church as a field hospital of Pope Francis. They prefer a closed-in church all dressed up in all these robes to fake holiness, swallowing the camel, big time without even cooking it. To give a pleasant taste of living in God to all those who despair of existence, to all those who despair of life. She never gives up or declares herself vanquished, overcome. 7 weeks before her death, she will cry out, I have already said it, I will die weapons in hand. The footnote here talks about that she will enter the Carmel, as shall be seen, with the very precise will to force the doors open. She had trouble getting in at 15. Jesus has said, the reign of heaven suffers violence, and it is the violent who ravish it or enter into it by force or grab it by violence. Violence to oneself, not against others. It has been the same for me regarding the kingdom of Carmel. The good God wanted to make me conquer the fortress of Carmel at sword point, pointing my sword. This is a letter to Father Rouland, the 1st of November, 1896. So that this little flower was a fighter and a soldier with confidence, overcoming the fear of death, as testified by all these soldiers who, in the trenches, terribly afraid, found in this little saint a source of trust. This is what she accomplished, again, by her being perfected, quote unquote, as Jesus was, through his suffering. That's what the letter to the Hebrews says. Again, in chapter 5, he became high priest by this method. In the same way, Christ did not glorify himself. That's the real translation. Hebrews 5:5, to become high priest, but he obtained it from the one who said, "You are my son, today I have begotten you," as it also says in another place, "You are a priest forever," similar to Melchizedek, who, having offered in the days of his flesh pleas and supplications with powerful clamor and tears to the one who could save him from death, was heard because of his piety. And even though being son, with what he suffered, he learned obedience. And having arrived at perfection, he became a cause of eternal salvation for all those who obey him. So that Jesus was perfected as a sacrifice is supposed to be perfect. In Hebrew, tam, without blemish, blameless. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Teleios in Matthew, Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5. And my professor, Albert Vanois, later cardinal, expert on Hebrews, I took his course in Rome at the Biblicum, said that this perfection is in accordance with the Greek rendition of priestly ordination, perfect the hands of Aaron and his sons. Hebrews says, fill their hands. But this perfection is what we continually strive for by this perfect obedience to God in trust. That's what Abraham did. He obeyed God because he trusted him, even when sent to an unknown land when he was very, very old, circumcised at 99, etc. So that Thérèse's obedience also, I was speaking about her mother being, and her whole family and her whole atmosphere there, conservative Catholics, etc. Her uncle was very right-wing. Guérin, the newspaper guy who inherited a lot of money. But I mean, it was like this, like here, either you're with God or you're a positivist atheist, and there was no in between. Thérèse was the in between one. And if you reach in between in the sense of the real gospel, neither the non-gospel of an atheist nor the rigid sort of don't change anything gospel, false gospel of the other side. She was the one that had to endure all that, and did it by smiling and gravitating toward the nuns that she least liked, accepting things from the hand of God, the last place. I think she was one of the ones that said, no one will envy you if you seek the last place. It's the same thing Paul talks about. Have the same sentiments as Jesus. consider others superior. Even though he was in the form of God, he humbled himself like a son or a child. Pais Theu, the child of God, of the suffering servant. Isaiah 53 is a servant or a child. Son is another word. So if we become like little children, really trying to trust in God. I'm the most nervous, distrustful guy. I talked about the Enneagrams one of these days, or maybe even the Lost Hour. Cowardice, fear is my biggest problem. Even when things are going well, that's when my fear kicks up the most. I've been sick for a couple of weeks. I didn't clean my place for several weeks. Finally cleaned it. I feel things are in order, and all of a sudden you start worrying. Things are going so good, maybe something bad. When's the other shoe going to fall? Thérèse helps us in all this distrust and fear, which is what we really have to overcome. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Thérèse feared everything when her mother died when she was age 4. And then she overcame herself with divine grace and said, from then on, I embarked on a journey taking giant steps. Her course was short, 24 years. We have a lot longer usually to try to get some grasp of it. But we do it every day, trusting in God, praying, and abandoning us, because we're all going to die and suffer. My friend, the Dominican, just died a few days ago. I actually wrote part of his name on this soldier thing. He burst open into the order, just like Thérèse. He said that he didn't know anything about this. He said this right in the novitiate when everybody was going around sharing. He was an outsider from a very small town in Mexico, not the white Mexican type person, felt he was an outsider, maybe looked down upon, very ambitious guy, very smart guy. And he said, I see the order as a boulder that I have to crush in order to enter into. And he did that and then some, maybe too much. But nevertheless, we have to fight. This is the teaching of Islam. Jihad is really your personal struggle. I think it's a bad thing when they attack others. The Bhagavad Gita in Hinduism is all about the duty to fight, but not to. I mean, the metaphor is cousins in the battlefield having to fight, and Arjuna is despondent that he has to fight his family. And Lord Krishna proclaims this celestial song, Bhagavad Gita. You have to fight. It is your duty. I want to give up all the time. And God says, I kind of command you not to give up. Once you have this mandate, then it's not just you and your fear. It's God commanding, and you responding with trust. Instead of, this is my project and I don't think it's going too well and I don't have anybody to help me, so let me crumble or dull my fears. But rather do like Thérèse and die weapons in hand. And the weapons are those weapons of the end of Ephesians, which I will leave you to look up: the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, all these other things. Nourish ourselves with God's word in order to be able to continue this journey through the desert to the promised land. Without, if you today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts, or you shall not enter into the rest. And that's what we all want, is that great Sabbath rest.